premise of this conversation is to try and get a better understanding of how the design community, business owners, consumers, and image makers can help to further the discussion around sustainability in this industry. So with that having been said, I'd love to introduce Brandi, Elizabeth, Burak to come on stage so we can get the conversation started. All right, we're so lucky to have these three guests, each of which I'll introduce briefly because their pedigrees and backgrounds precede them. To my immediate left here, we have Elizabeth Peyton-Jones, best-selling author, leading nutritionist. The context in which she's here on our panel today is to explore and discuss her work with the Responsible Trust for Models, an organization dedicated to creating standardization and accreditation for the modeling industry. And then to her left, we have Brandi of Evio Beauty. She's a direct-to-consumer beauty powerhouse, has built an incredible brand from right here in Canada, an incredible personal story as well, which I'd encourage you to Google her name and see what she's done and the things that she's had to overcome to get here. So incredibly inspiring story. And then finally, to our very left here is Burak, who is currently the Dean of Fashion at the Parsons School of Design, and he's BOF 500, so very esteemed member of our panel here. And prior to that, Burak had a lot of great and progressive experience leading corporate responsibility for some of the most recognizable brands and retailers in the world. So with that having been said, I think if we can wrap up this conversation having explored the challenges existing in the industry today around sustainability, getting a sense of how each of our panelists through their respective lines of work and backgrounds are affecting change, and finally get a better understanding of what we need to rely on to look at the future, I think we'll be in a really good spot. So with that having been said, I'd love to kick off our discussion with a very chilling statistic. The global fashion industry congregated in Copenhagen not very long ago, and just before that summit had started, a study co-authored by a leading management consulting firm, Boston Consulting Group, had essentially stated that the progress around sustainability in fashion has begun to stall. And so I think the important question to ask there to someone like you, Burak, is when you hear this, having worked with some of the world's biggest companies, what do you think is going on that's the problem? What are some of the biggest issues that are essentially helping or hurting the industry from getting forward, and what can we do about it?
Well, in some ways, it may feel like it's not that surprising because one of the challenges most of the existing brands face is their existing business models. So when you grow to a certain size and you're dependent on your existing format to generate revenue every year over year, it's really hard to figure out how to turn it around. And in some ways, most of those companies have done enough to place patches in place to address their existing issues, and it has been always focused on reducing impact. But the reality is, if you're going to think about it really differently, you have to have a much more systemic thinking approach where you're redefining your whole business model. And that can only happen through new businesses that are really going into it with a fresh mindset and putting a system in place that enables them to address it from the ground up. Otherwise, it's so hard to go back and then rethink that model. So I understand the statistics and how fearful it makes everybody feel, but the reality is we are also seeing a lot of young designers that are just coming into the scene that are not necessarily being in that assessment, so that they are actually introducing new models that's going to challenge the future. So I'm still hopeful about it.
Which parts of the retail value chain specifically would you argue are the biggest culprits around the waste or all the essentially bad things that are happening?
I mean, we all play a role, right? So the reality is we want to buy more, and more, and that's driving producing more. So everybody is part of the same equation because every company is focused on growth, which means that you need to produce more products and more frequently. So the biggest challenge has been this idea that the genius model around fast fashion is now basically the norm in every industry, including luxury. Everybody is doing drops every couple of weeks, and they're trying to excite customers to buy more products on an ongoing basis. So reflecting back even the previous conversation with Aurora, it's interesting that individual designers that we see every day being challenged by their designs getting copied Part of the reason is that because there's so much pressure to introduce new ideas into the market, most of the designers in-house in larger brands are looking around, especially to young designers, to get inspiration and using that as a way of generating that excitement. But in the long term, we have to think beyond the product and understand what a brand represents, because what's happening is these individual brands are driving this speed to actually sell more products on a more frequent basis, regardless of the price point, and ultimately pulling everybody in the supply chain forward, including the raw material suppliers, everybody that's producing the materials, distribution, all the way to the consumer who's buying that product. If we don't buy that frequently or as many, clearly there will not be that many product that's being put out there.
And Brandi, would you echo a lot of those same sentiments that Burak's just mentioned as the founder of a beauty company?
Absolutely. So I also echo that as a consumer as well. I'm a huge minimalist for those reasons. But also as a brand, I think that we need to come up with very strategic ways to, for example, something that we do is we don't use water in our product. It's more heavily pigmented, therefore you need less of it. It still lasts about the same amount of time. And so getting strategic as to how we're making these products so that we need less of it. It'll last the same amount of time, give the same kind of performance, so that we are promoting kindness to our skin, ourselves, the planet, and our sustainability, as well as still, there's no harm in lining our pockets with dollars, and that doesn't need to be compromised with sustainability. They can really live in the same environment together, and we can do good and still do good for ourselves in a business perspective as well. And I think that actually, Elizabeth said this really well yesterday. I'm not going to say it as elegantly, but you said something about how doing good is good for the bottom line. How did you elegantly say that again? It was so well worded. She's really good with words.
I think that's true, but I think I was saying good practice is good business.
Yes, good practice is good business. And so I think it really aligns with that, is really being conscious about how we're creating things to create less that does the same is really important, and that good practice is good for business as well. Yeah.
And Elizabeth, I think, Burak being somebody who's worked with big companies and who's educating the next generation of leaders now, and Brandi building her own business, that's the context of talking about big companies and the things they're doing. But if we look at image makers, especially as stakeholders and the face of this industry, how do you think the experiences that, let's say, models have acts as a metaphor for a lot of the quote-unquote bad things that we're seeing fashion being a culprit of today?
Well, it's interesting because Burak was saying about fast fashion, wanting it now, the next fashion, the next great style, the must-have. But behind every great style is a face. It's a human body. And unfortunately, the disposable view that we have of fashion is the disposable view that we have of the human being at the end of that chain. So models, unfortunately, are picked up and disposed of very quickly because they want new is seen as better, a new style, a new face. So, we have to be very careful the way we consume, and I think that we should become more aware, or at least I'm hoping that we become more aware of the sort of human aspect and fallout of that as well.
Is there any justification that we can provide for some of the chilling statistics that we keep hearing about? Perhaps it's just so hard to do logistics and fulfillment in an economically viable way when Amazon Prime has educated and trained all of us as consumers to expect the smallest little widget in front of our door in a massive box that really shouldn't have been as big as it was. Burak, your thoughts on that?
It goes back to building a new culture. So I'm experiencing it very differently. Sometimes I feel like I'm in a bubble, sitting in a place where we have thousands of young talent and designers constantly questioning the future. I see a very different future than what everybody's experiencing outside. But every time outside engaging with the industry as well as the consumers, I see the reality of the day-to-day and what needs to change. So I think it's about bridging that gap and finding ways of getting to a place where even the larger businesses recognize that the culture of especially the Generation Z is very different and their expectations are different. what they value is very different, that the business model has to evolve into something else. I even question what is fast fashion, what's luxury, what's mass market. I think everything is blending, and in some ways, we are also looking at what's the value of a product versus a brand on an ongoing basis. And the reality is we are consuming as much because of the power of the brand beyond an individual product. So I think collectively we need to think about what is the role of the brand in society and how do they engage with each of us. And the ones that are engaging with the consumer they care about, with the values that are related to their audience, are succeeding better than everybody else. Just like what Aurora was talking about, how she engages with her audience. I think larger brands are now at that tipping point as well to figure out how do we continue this relationship without necessarily jeopardizing our businesses, because ultimately they're hitting a point where they're not going to be able to grow further.
So you mentioned a great word, culture, right? Changing the culture. I've read a lot of conflicting reports about millennials, for example. Some reports will say they'll ditch brands that aren't responsible. Others will say it doesn't matter how sustainable you are. Even Aurora sort of alluded to this in her talk. It's got to look good, right? And it has to be at the right price point. What are you seeing anecdotally, Brandi, as the founder of your beauty company, and what are you doing to help educate consumers to make the best decision, not just for themselves, but for the environment?
Yeah, so I think, honestly, I really think you can have it all in a lot of those respects. So you can be sustainable, you can be well-priced, and you can be fashionable. It's difficult, but it's worth it. And it does take a lot more effort. It does take a lot more risk, especially in today's ecosystem that's currently set up for brands and manufacturing to develop. It definitely takes a lot more risk. And so it depends on what your appetite is for that risk. But I think that you can have that. You can be sustainable, cost-effective. It means that you have to produce things in ginormous quantities in order to have them be cost effective for the consumer. So you have to take that as a brand owner or as a brand, you have to take that kind of risk to believe in yourself so ineptly that I'm going to sell all of these quantities in the time frame in which a natural product can sustain itself for, which is a really big risk to take. And I think a lot of smaller brands that are starting to adopt this new kind of business culture and creating this new ecosystem that was just spoken about, a lot of them are not ready to take those risks yet because they're still so small. And I think that it's a shift within the thought of business is actually going to be what's going to shift in sustainability. So I think that there's a place to celebrate like small business Saturdays and things like that, absolutely, and support local, that's amazing. But we need to support them to become bigger, not to always be small, and that's how we're going to create that change. And we need to start supporting them even when they do become bigger, and not just think, oh, they have all the customers they need now. We need to continue to support those sustainable companies that are taking those giant risks, because that's what's going to be what shifts that paradigm so that we can have the sustainability in the much bigger way in which it's being built, because we need a lot of those small business ethos to become big business in order to make that change.
That's an interesting point, because at the Copenhagen Summit, Kering's chairman, and he talked about the need for co-opetition in fashion, but how do you see co-opetition becoming a thing in a world where Steve Madden readily rips off, Aurora's shoes as an example, right? How do we take this ethos that you talked about that's rooted in such pure values and essentially blow it up?
This is the first time I've ever heard the word co-opetition. I like it.
Around, I didn't know that.
I don't get out much, I guess. I think that it's super important. We have a collaboration with a company that is significantly larger than us, with Aurora Cannabis, and some people were surprised by that, but the truth is those large companies need us just as much, if not more, for exactly what you just spoke about. They need to stay engaged with their consumer. They need these ethos to be something that's authentic, and their systems don't currently allow for that authenticity. So by them putting their company dollars and investing it in a place in which can help create that change from the ground up, because they can't go back and fix it now. They've lost that trust with the consumer. But if they start to bet their dollars in the right places, that's where they're going to start to gain back that traction and that notoriety with the consumer. And so the truth is they need the small guys more than we need them now. We have e-com, we have direct to consumer, we can, have brick and mortars with this open space just about anywhere. They need us for our notoriety and our authenticity. So I think that's where
Coopetition
really comes into place. Is for the first time in consumer history, they need the little guy.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing that with the advent of platforms such as Shopify and seeing death by 1,000 cuts for CPGs that have traditionally invested hundreds of billions of dollars to make sure that we buy their diapers and we buy their lotions and potions and God knows what else. But now you have individual brands that are coming out, launching on Instagram, building that community and having a very tight relationship with their consumers. Elizabeth, the work that you're doing around trust, trust is in responsible trust for models. What are you seeing work and maybe not work as you're trying to educate big brands around the agencies, the modeling agencies they work with, and how are you even educating the modeling agencies around how they should be treating the talent that they work with?
It's a big question.
Break it down.
I think, the great thing, what I love about what I'm doing is that everyone loves fashion. We all talk about fashion. We're all here because we love fashion. It'd be interesting to know, how long it took everybody to dress today to make the statement they wanted to make. Fashion means something to everybody. So this is like a really pushing on an open door. It's an open conversation. And I think that when we all have those defining moments of, Michelle Obama in her book was talking about her aha moment when, she went to these schools and she had really important things to say about, education and child poverty and things like that. And in fact, the only thing the press wanted to talk about was her clothes. Clothes are very important, and the way we use them and consume them is very important. And that conversation now is becoming even more important. So originally, when I started talking about the human aspect of the clothes chain, people weren't interested. Oh no, they're fine, they're beautiful. Why do you have to worry about them? They've won the gene pool. They've got it all. Why do you have to worry? But I was saying, well, actually, they get into debt poverty. There's sort of, there's abuse, mental or physical. They're very, very young. There's no standard. There's no best practice. They actually need to be taken care of. And then the answer was very much, well, it's very short. Life span of a model is very short, and really that's old school. We don't have to worry about them anymore. And then Weinstein came out, and then all the stories came out, and then people began to think about this a little bit more. So to answer your question, modeling agencies have a view of the way that they need to treat models. And the old school view is that, models believe they're being employed by the modeling agency, where in fact, they employ the model agency. But they're very, very young. They don't understand about contracting or finance. So it's a conversation that's out there. Modeling agencies are taking a lot more steps now to ensure best practice. Brands, I think, are realizing that at the end of their supply chain, the people that they are using to sell those clothes are real. They're real human beings that have a life, that if they're not treated well, suffer. And I think because of Gen Z and the millennials and things like that, who actually want to see good sustainability, who want to see good practice, people are beginning to step up, and it's a great conversation to have, and now people are having it. And what my organization is doing is putting a standard over modeling agencies and allowing brands to buy into that and become members and sign a pledge to say, yes, the people that we are working with are being treated well. So to answer your question, yes, it's a conversation that's being had. Yes, the doors are beginning to open, but it's a conversation that needs going, and the consumer is very important in this, and that's why it's great that people are listening to it.
You have the certification, which is fantastic, but as we think about, which Burak mentioned earlier, educating the next generation, you also launched a groundbreaking course at the London School of Fashion.
Yes.
And I'd love for you to share with the audience what that's about and what your vision is for that initiative.
Well, everybody talks about empowerment, and for me, empowerment needs education. I mean, you can't just say, oh, you're empowered because you can say rude things about people on Instagram. I mean, that doesn't protect you, really. So for me, it's all about education. So, Burak is front line on education, and I wanted to create a school for models in a fashion school, so they could see the designer, and the designer can see the model. So they're not modeling on mannequins, they're modeling on real people. And it becomes much more real then. And this, it's a course, and it's tough because, you learn about contracting, you learn about finance, but you also learn about movement classes, makeup, and things like that. And it's only for the professional models. They have to be signed to a modeling agency. So it's about upskilling them so they can be the best model that they can possibly be, and also the best brand representative they could possibly be. And they learn how to publicly speak. So they learn how to speak in sound bites. They learn how to stand. They know how to be a representative of themselves, but also for the brand who wishes to choose them to be that representative. So it's a very empowering course. And I'm rolling it out in different countries as well. So this is not just, an English endeavor. I have my United Nations badge on. Thank you, Swarovski. And no, it's good. It's rolling out and it's doing well. Thank you.
Fantastic. And so on this topic of education, Burak, I'd love to, we talked about this briefly a few weeks ago, what you're doing at Parsons, whether it's, and you coined this term, we're all about terms today, unusual partners. Who are some of these unusual partners that the fashion industry can seek out as they're looking to help educate big brands, but also the next generation of talent? And also, what's my wheelhouse, what technologies may be getting you excited that can help to reinterpret different parts of the retail value chain in a more just way?
I mean, one of the challenges of the fashion industry is it's been built on this 19th century model in terms of production of garments. And finally, we are at that tipping point where this is being questioned, but that's changing every aspect of the industry, all the way to how a brand engages with the customer, from design to manufacturing to retail. But just touching on the unusual partnerships, I guess, one of my issues when I started the role 4 years ago was looking at the number of graduates coming out of design schools and recognizing that there's ultimately a limit of number of designers that are needed out there, as well as the fact that the industry is already at $13 trillion annually, I think, and that we need to think about what is the future of the fashion industry. And how do we use fashion skills to really rethink having an impact beyond the industry itself? And to enable that, we wanted to kind of open up our curriculum in a different way, and we introduced new pathways. And one of them that I'm particularly fond of, because it's really building on my background in sustainability as well, that we called Fashion Systems and Society. And the intention of this pathway is to really reflect back on what I was starting the conversation with around the issues of business models and how do we rethink the future of the fashion industry itself. But that opened the door for us to say that actually fashion designers can really come up with models not only for the industry but beyond the industry itself. Ultimately, today when we are recruiting students, the number one criteria we look at is, are they critical thinkers? So as a critical thinker and someone who's able to use design thinking to bring solutions to human needs, we can actually address many issues beyond just creating a garment. So we are definitely not shying away from using fashion in that journey, but also we are using fashion as a way to open that conversation to have an impact in many areas. So just a few examples of people that we have worked with. So for example, we started a partnership with a healthwear startup called Care and Wear. So this was an easy, low-hanging fruit in my mind, because we were looking at the healthwear industry, recognizing that fashion has never really touched it. And we also saw a few examples of people looking at medical gowns that we all wear when we go to a hospital, and we wanted to rethink that process. And we came up with a whole new version that was really putting human-centered design as a part of the core of the journey that we went through with the students, and made sure that that design was sustainable, functional, and also meeting all the cultural appropriateness that a patient needs that's coming from different backgrounds, as well as body shapes and sizes and ages. So after that, we expanded into new ventures. So we had a partnership with AARP, which is the second largest lobbying body, I think, in US, representing basically aging and retired people. And they have a campaign called Disrupt Aging, and we wanted to use fashion as a way of getting into a conversation around aging. And through that journey, we were able to come up with solutions with a fashion lens in practical ways of engaging a population that's over 50, looking at topics such as aging and disability, aging and mobility, aging and sexuality. And using fashion as the language, as you were mentioning, because that's the easy way in. Everybody understands fashion, doesn't matter where you're coming from, how old you are, and what's your cultural background. So it suddenly opens doors to engage in a very unusual way. And that also makes us question, can the fashion industry play a role, even with products for a new population that they haven't engaged with outside of the typical fashion processes? And then find new solutions to also bring a dialogue to these challenging topics sometimes that we don't talk about. So how do you talk about aging and sexuality if you don't put something like fashion in the middle of it? And then finally, another example, we most recently did a partnership with one of the UN agencies, UN Population Fund, looking at girls' and women's menstruation needs in refugee camps. And working with a factory out of Sri Lanka, and then operating in a refugee camp on the border of South Sudan in Kenya. We were able to actually have our students Skype directly with the camp, understanding the local cultural, religious context, and creating solutions for the daily needs of girls and women. And ultimately, we took prototypes and tested it last summer on the ground. And now we are kind of taking it to the next level, and we will be launching this product together with UN Population Fund at their big event in Kenya in November 2019. So these are ways of opening the dialogue to say, how can a fashion designer think out of the box and engage differently, and not to shy away from the industry as well. The thing that satisfies me the most is to see the most creative, talented designers that are doing stuff for the runway, but also engaging with society in this way, so that they think very differently about their role in society, but also how they want to engage with their quote-unquote consumer, because suddenly it becomes much more human. Because when we say consumer, we take ourselves out of the equation, but ultimately it's always about ourselves. So we are crossing those boundaries and experimenting to see how we can bring change.
That's fantastic. And Brandi, you as the founder of a beauty company, we have a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience that are probably doing some introspecting today and thinking, what can I do? Not just as a business owner, but as somebody who's responsible to all these consumers. I know Evio's played with strategic partnerships. You've done, donation schemes. Tell us a bit about the initiatives that you've engaged.
Yeah, so we definitely use our platform. We try to engage. So I actually really like what you were just saying about making it human, and that's also how we engage to make these changes too. So we hear like B2B and B2C and things like that all the time. But the truth is it's always an H to H, a human-to-human interaction that results in a transaction. That's all business is. And so when you really think about that, it's just how do you want to treat another human? And it's kind of like the golden rule, treat others the way that you want to be treated. And so we really produce our products in that way as well. And some things that we do that we really focus on are 3 pillars. So we really focus on being better to the planet, being better to ourselves, and being better to animals as well. And so one thing that we've done is one of our manufacturers is also one of our investors. It's an example of one of those mammoths with the what did you call it?
Coopetition.
Coopetition. Another example of this coopetition is that this huge, the world's largest manufacturer in our space for this particular type of manufacturing, they invested in us, and I actually recently learned that, so they are the biggest, they manufacture so many companies, amazing companies, and we just found out that we were the first people to ever have them audit our ingredients for animal testing. That blew my mind. And so that meant that although all of these cosmetics we don't test on animals on them, it meant that they didn't test the final products, but a lot of their ingredients were tested on animals. And so little things like that just like ensuring that we're thinking of the entire supply chain, that if we're standing behind something, if we're going to say it, that we truly understand it. And that also kind of goes back to being a company that's starting that process at the beginning, because could you imagine if you were a giant company and had to go back and check out, 13,000 plus vendors as to whether the cost on that would just be astronomical to audit. Like one audit can be like $10,000. So that's just huge. And so the fact that we have that luxury and that privilege to start doing that at base level is pretty phenomenal, and we don't take that lightly. So we really try to be conscious in every single thing that we're doing. And then that's setting a new precedence as well. And so animal testing is one of them. Also, just in the way that we interact with our consumers is a really big part of it. So we really believe in progress before perfection, and you don't know what you don't know, and a lot of the times we're learning things from our consumers. And that's another thing too, that being a brand that is really engaged with your consumer, you can not just give them a platform to talk, but truly listen to what they have to say. And we've learned so much and then been able to pivot quickly and change things because of what the consumer is teaching us, whether that be with ingredients, whether it be how we're communicating with them. Again, if you have a partner, like a love partner, or if you have a best friend, when they tell you something, you listen, and then you bring it in, and then you try to change the way you're engaging to improve your relationships. And business should be the exact same. It's just a human-to-human interaction that results in a transaction. And so we really try to live by that in how we're operating with our company. And I believe that we're a company of great people, and so we truly treat others the way we want to be treated in even what we're putting on their skin.
That's incredible. So we've talked about, and we really didn't even touch on it because we don't need to, the massive waste, the massive, essentially challenges facing the fashion industry as it relates to sustainability. We've touched on what you three are doing individually, given your backgrounds and your lines of work, to affect change. You mentioned something, Brandi, cost. I want to play devil's advocate here very briefly. Sustainability is sometimes thought to be within the realm of the elite, something that's not accessible by everybody. How are you, as a founder, making this notion of sustainability accessible to all?
Yeah, so I started the company from a place of not having the privilege to have disposable income, even to know where my next meal is coming from. So when I started, I was living in a shelter. And I had $15 to build this company on. So I really understood what it meant to, and also a conversation that we had yesterday about how, like when you are eating food that isn't good for you, your brain functions differently, and then therefore you're making different decisions. And it goes with what's going on in your body as well. And I really, truly feel as if it should be accessible to everybody. There's challenges in that because of the way the system has already been set up. But it doesn't need to continue that way. It's going to take a couple very gutsy people to just start making a new precedence and a new norm and just saying no to the old and really being bullish in some capacities with compassion and kindness to say, no, this is how we're doing it moving forward. And to be those bullish bodies and entrepreneurs and consumers also saying, no, this is where we're going to bet our dollar moving forward. And so things like the sustainability, I had to take some really, really major risks in scaling in terms of size in order to make it affordable, to keep our prices low. All of our prices, although they're affordable luxury, all of our products are under $50, and they're natural and organic and sustainable and very thoughtfully made. But we were able to do that because of some of these coopetitions. Partnering with some larger companies and larger manufacturers. And then again, it goes down to the human-to-human aspect, that people were also, not only was I willing to take that major risk because the sustainability and what was being put on bodies of people whom didn't have a lot of disposable income, and having everybody be a part and included in that conversation was so important to me, that I was willing to take these risks, but then also to the credit of so many other people that they saw my passion behind it and they were willing to then join in on that risk. And so without that co-opetition, I'm just gonna use that word all day now, I love it. Because of that, then we were able to actually create something that has legs to it, that is affordable, that does good, and really it came down to that human-to-human aspect. Those people would not have been willing to take that risk on my vision if we didn't have a human-to-human connection, again, that they really trusted that I would place those dollars in the right place. And then also it comes down to business, that I would then get them a return on this vision. And so it just comes down, again, to just being humans with each other in business.
Totally. Elizabeth, your take, when perhaps is sustainability not necessarily a net driver for a certain initiative or a conversation? When can it maybe be a bad thing?
Sorry, say that again?
Sustainability, when do you think it could maybe be a reductive idea?
I've come from I'm a master herbalist, I'm a naturopath, and for 20 years, I've treated people, and I've written 3 books. And during that journey, what I learned to do was listen to people, because often, what they're saying is not actually what they mean. So in the silence, you actually hear the problem. And my remit has always been do no harm. That's the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. And I just think that if business steps back and does no harm, in their supply chain, and they know that they're doing no harm, then they are only doing good, and that's good business. So when Brandi says, treat your consumer the way you wish to be treated, that's good business. It's good business, and you do no harm. I think when business, we've got to a level of business where it was all about the bottom line. It was about making the most money that you could make, and the fallout from that was the planet, and the fallout from that was humans. And it's taken people like myself and others, huge swathes of people, to step up and say, actually, we have a little bit of a problem here, so let's address it. And that's what happens. I mean, industry makes a lot of money, and then sometimes you just need somebody to come in and say, okay, let's address the imbalance. But I think it's perfectly doable.
I just had an aha moment, as Oprah likes to say in her interviews, when you said that. The way I just listened to you there, Elizabeth, was even if as a business you recognize there's such structural and foundational challenges that need to be addressed, like if you're not doing anything meaningful, just shut up. By putting out greenwashing and putting out products that end up being recalled, Brandi, under this fake ruse and guise of sustainability, just staying quiet sometimes can be the best course of action until we figured out what we need to do.
Yeah.
So on that note, I think we should definitely open up the floor to some questions. Okay, well, while we're waiting, I have one question for Elizabeth. I sent her an article the other day. I'm sure you guys are all reading about artificial intelligence and all the crazy things that just seem to come out every day, and one of the big things is deep fakes. So real people being presented as themselves when they're actually not talking. There was that Obama interview. There's also deep fakes with models. So just email Elizabeth. I'm like, does this solve your problems? Like, maybe we don't need models anymore. Computers will just make people. But then I think there might be that issue of, now we have no checks and balances because there's no real people expressing real emotions around, this is normal, this isn't normal, I can't have a 3-inch waist. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, I don't think it solves any problems. But and in fact, it makes the model stronger because, if you just have a face on a screen, they have no personality. And models at the moment need a personality. They don't get anywhere unless I feel unless they're very well trained, they're very well versed in what they need to do, and they have a huge personality to go with it. It's very, very difficult to be a successful model, and you need to grasp that. So I don't think I'm not worried about artificial intelligence, although it is a cheaper way, obviously, of doing it. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Erica. A few years ago, I became aware that denim is one of the biggest polluters in fashion. in the creation of denim and how much water is used in it, and what can the industry do, and brands specifically who buy denim do to reduce that impact on the environment?
I mean, I can probably jump into that. So you're absolutely right. Denim has been one of those garments that has massive impact because of the dyeing process, the water it uses, including the pesticides that are used for the growth of the cotton. The reality is there has been a lot of pressure on these brands, and quite a few of them have been taking initiatives. So everybody from Levi's to Nudie Jeans have been looking at how to reduce the water in the dyeing process, looking at using organic cotton as well as recycled cotton in the journey. But what I find more interesting is it's a durable enough fabric that we are seeing young designers experiment in a whole new way and even elevate the secondhand materials that they buy. So one of our recent graduates from Japan, actually, his name is Kozaburo Akazaka, and he won the special prize last year at the LVMH Prize. And he basically went to Goodwill and bought maybe like 20 pair of secondhand jeans, and then he shredded them, hand woven them in a loom in the studio, and then ended up selling these pieces for $3,000 a piece at Dover Street Market. So that's a way of showing how you can think out of the box, so you're using what already exists. And that ties into the general trend we are seeing with the young designers. This idea of what is luxury is shifting so quickly. It's no more about the material itself. So it's not just using the cashmeres and the exotic skins and the furs. And we're seeing a lot of reaction for a lot of these materials as well. Today, it's more about the design process that goes into it, how it's made, and also the whole transparency around that journey. And the uniqueness of the product that's making people feel like I'm buying a luxury product. Hence, it's being recognized by especially concept stores like Dover Street Market and many others to give visibility to these outcomes, that I think it's going to influence the way even the luxury brands think about it, all the way to even what a future of denim looks like.
Hey, I have a specific question for Brandi. As someone who wants to open up her own sustainable brand for cosmetics, what was the biggest challenge you came facing in the process? And if you had advice to give your past self from your future self, what would you give them?
Yeah, I love it. To quote Nike, just do it. And to dream big. I kind of touched on this before too. I think a lot of people, particularly in the beauty space, which is really cool because indie beauty is taking, like, it's having its moment right now, which is a great time to start your own brand, but to think big. I think it's also something from female empowerment as well. I think a lot of the times we don't, as female entrepreneurs or women in business, we see the stats that are very true, that we only get 2.2% of venture capitalist funding, things like that. But you can be a part of that 2.2%, and you can move the dime on that as well. And so think big and know that you can do that, and believe in yourself, and surround yourself with really good people, and don't surround yourself with yes people. Definitely surround yourself with people who are going to challenge you and tell you when you have a shit idea. Sometimes, you know, when you see like billboards and you're like, didn't that person have any friends to tell them not to do that? Like, whoa, like who decided that billboard was a good idea? And nobody told them that it wasn't. So definitely surround yourself with people who are going to challenge you on your ideas, and also surround yourself with people in and outside of the industry. I think a lot of the times too, in creating something that I've experienced, is that that when you are creating something, you often look inwards, like to that industry. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges with actually creating change to like these bigger systems, is we look at things and sometimes we think, oh, we don't have the education, I dropped out of school when I was 14, so I don't think education is a challenge. People make challenge, they might say that capital is the biggest challenge. I had $15. So if I can do it, you can do it, girl. You got this.
Maybe can I add one more thing, because I'm seeing quite a lot of our graduates going into even the beauty space. because it's incredibly profitable segment of the industry, number one, but also there's the increased competition. So it's finding your niche is the most critical bit at this moment, because so many players going into it from all over the world, and all the way to even technology solutions are now becoming an attractive element. We have a recent graduates who launched a brand called Hello Ava, and it's basically beauty tech. She studied fashion design, but going into it to look at scanning individuals' faces to assess the type of product they need, and then working with individuals like yourself and the larger brands.
Hello, Ava reached out to us.
That's great.
Yeah, they're great. They're doing really cool things.
So that there's open spaces and niches that you need to figure out how do you tap into that as well to succeed.
I totally agree 100%. I mean, you see like influencers like coming out with their own beauty line, and then you kind of just wonder if they like went through the same, $15 thing, and then their beauty explodes because of their influence. So it's really helpful to know that there are still those Cinderella stories where it's like you started from nothing and you worked your way up there.
Literally started from the bottom now. It's true. You can totally do it. And there just needs to be more young women who just persevere through it. So be that woman.
Thank you.
One last question before we break for lunch.
Thank you. I'll make it quick. Burak, I just wanted to tell you that I happened to be at an event on Saturday night where a woman who's a professor at McMaster, I have a feeling maybe she might have been involved in the same conference that you were at, because she spoke about combating ageism through fashion, which I thought was interesting. And I was going to ask you about that, and you talked about it, so thank you. The question I just want to ask quickly is, I was struck by the comments about Michelle Obama. And the fact is, most people love fashion, but not everybody does. And people can be judged by what they wear, and sometimes that's not fair. And when you talked about her, I couldn't help but think, is there a chance that fashion actually reduces the impact? If people are so concerned about what somebody looks like, they may not potentially get everything out of whatever's being discussed may not be as impactful. How do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah. Who wants to take it?
Sorry, was that the... I think as consumers, well, as humans, we want to project the best of ourselves that we can, and sometimes clothes help us to do that. So when we're not feeling very confident inside, we put on something that makes us feel confident. And the fashion industry definitely helps with that message. It helps when we wear our favorite item and we feel relaxed, because then our personality begins to shine. And if we're feeling like this, we don't shine. And then people step back. Fashion's selling a dream. We all buy it because we feel inspired by it. We don't buy it because we think, oh, this is, I don't know, I don't know about that. We buy it because we're thinking, wow, I want to look like that, or that, I want to see how that makes me feel. You're never going to take that edge out of fashion, because that's how people sell. They sell because they want to feel inspired. But as a consumer, we have choices. And there's so much choice out there at the moment. And as a consumer, we can definitely say, you know what? Somebody else is making something similar to you but has better ethics.
But maybe I can add to that as well. The reality is somebody like Michelle Obama is dressing with the intention of beyond just looking good, right? So no matter what the question is, we're not in a place to say you shouldn't be asking that question. It's turning it around and highlighting that there's a purpose behind that selection, and maybe the individual that needs to be highlighted and their achievements and what journey they came from, and then be able to bring it back to the core reason that the individual is
Yeah,
there.
so exactly, fashion starts conversation, or at least you make, absolutely, standpoint. Does that kind of answer, did that answer your question or not really? Or
Shopping.
Sorry?
You're right, it does. And that's why people feel younger, too.
But ageism is also something that needs to be addressed in the industry, which I think is being, with the whole diversity issue. So, absolutely, I think we're seeing all ages, all cultures, and that's good. Opens up conversations.
Also, to add to that too, I think that some of those challenges are actually what can, in sometimes, build really, really strong people in the industry. So for example, you'll see on red carpets all the time where women are being asked, what are you wearing? And men are not being asked that question. And that's, I think, maybe where like fashion is, I don't want to say being used against them, because it's not. In fact, it can be used as quite the opposite. And we're having more powerful, strong women find their voices and be willing to actually use that question as a platform. So it's almost a blessing when they get asked that question, because it opens up controversial conversations. And as society, a lot of the times we shy away from hard conversations. We do it in our love lives, we do it in our friendships, we shy away from hard conversations. And in order to see the change in which we're all talking about here, we have to have hard conversations. And so even if you are only being asked, oh, what designer are you wearing? That's such a great leeway to answer that question with compassion that it's not the right question. And if you want better answers, ask better questions. And that's a great opportunity to have that hard conversation in the public limelight.
Thank you, everybody, very much.